Welcome back to another episode of Investing Explained. Here's today's question. So when you ask me specifically, yes, there is a lot of information that I don't pay attention to. That's also one of the reasons why I've been much less active on social media. For instance, every Sunday, I've dedicated 7 minutes on Twitter. That's typically to share the newest episode, to respond to the audience, and of course, once in a while, find great content. But I really try to limit my time on social media for the same reasons as you mentioned, because I tend to live in an echo chamber too. I typically only seek new information if it's by a trusted source or referred by a trusted source. And that is partly to save time, but also to enhance the quality of the time I do spend consuming new information and making myself smarter. So I try to do that a few hours a day. Now, this is not the same as saying that I'm not critical about the information I get, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about whether a trusted source is right or wrong, and of course, whether I'm mistaken myself. At least in my experience, when it comes to investing, and it might be even worse with Bitcoin, as you mentioned, it can get pretty ugly. You have one extreme who, quote unquote, found the truth, and everyone who's not invested in Bitcoin must be almost cognitive challenged by not understanding the virtues of Bitcoin. And then on the other extreme, you have people who look at Bitcoiners as degenerate gamblers who found a digital tulipmania. And those people typically never researched Bitcoin with an open mind and sort of like sticks to the childmonger notion of Bitcoin being rat poison. So keeping that in mind, I would like to elaborate more on how I go about combating my own biases, because I don't want to be in those two extremes. But what I do to combat my own biases, and I sure have a lot, is that first I always think about the incentives whenever I listen to what people are saying. I've experienced a lot of people who missed the boat on Bitcoin, were wrong in their analysis. They become really angry whenever it comes to Bitcoin because even though that you might say that they don't have a financial incentive, if they, in their mind, are losing $1,000 every time the price of Bitcoin moves $50, all financial biases kicks in, and they continue to look for explanations why Bitcoin will eventually fail, instead of being objective that they could just have been wrong. But then I would say that Bitcoiners are just as biased. If you argue for Bitcoin, you typically have a long position, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you might rightly say that if it wouldn't make any sense to argue passionately about Bitcoin if you don't have skin in the game. So people are in no way insincere whenever they have a Bitcoin position and argue that it's valuable. They truly believe that, and you can count me in on that. But they have all the incentives in the world to spread the gospel of Bitcoin, since it's by definition is based on trust and mass adoption. So if I can choose who I listen to, I don't want to speak to the firm believer or the firm non-believer, but the thoughtful person who used to hold Bitcoin and now sold, or it could be the thoughtful person who, after careful analysis, took a position. Lynn Alden, who we had on the last episode, we referred to a few times here already. Now, she's a good example of the latter. Someone who is very critical and then decided to take a position because of careful analysis after being very skeptical, or it could be the other way around. And so that really takes me back to my argument of understanding both sides of the argument, really to get rid of my own biases, challenge myself, speaking to Preston, who will do everything he can to challenge me, which is great. If you want to truly understand both arguments, what should you then do? And it is very difficult. We are wired a different way in terms of how we collect our information. But what I found to be very useful, let me just give you an example of what I'm doing right now. So it probably doesn't come as any surprise to people, but I'm very interested in understanding economic systems and the role of governments through history. I try not to speak too much of that here on the show because I don't want it to make the podcast into a financial history lesson. I think everyone would just be super bored if I did that. So that's not the intention, but I do get a lot of my inspiration from understanding those systems better and looking back in history. Just last week, I was reading Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and now I'm reading Capital and Ideology by Thomas Piketty. And he, of all people, a French economist, comes from the very opposite spectrum of the pure capitalists like Adam Smith. And he definitely has a very different agenda and incentive But to me, it's too easy and wrong just to read one genre and say, well, then that's the truth. Like, this economist refers to this economist who says that this economist is right. Like, no, like, if they're all in the same study group together, you're not going to be any smarter. And you might think that you don't form your own opinion then. So to answer your question, not through short posts, but through multiple well-researched, primarily books, with opposing opinions, and speaking with thoughtful people who argue both sides of the arguments. If you are well aware of the incentives of those authors and those people you speak to, that is how I would say that you should form an opinion. And it's a quite time-consuming approach. Most people don't want to do it for that reason, because most people prefer to listen to pundits who are very one-sided because it confirms what they already believe in, and they don't have to reflect on it and make their own conclusions. That is what you want to avoid. I would suggest the other way around. Even though it is a time-consuming process, I think you will find that you'll be rewarded in the end.
I absolutely love this question. I think this is such an important question, especially right now with everything that's happening in the world. There was a book that Stig and I covered. We did a whole episode on this. I can't remember when we did it, but the name of the book was Super Forecasters. And this book really helped me gain an appreciation for seeing both sides of how important it is to see both sides of an issue, to hear the arguments for both sides, like Stig was mentioning. I would highly encourage you to go read that book. It is a fantastic example of why it's important and how lethal you can become by looking at both sides of an argument. I remember Charlie Munger talking about when he went through law school and how they would be given a case and they'd have to argue one side of the case, and then they would go back and they'd retry the exact same case over again, but then they'd have to take the counterparty to the side that they just got done doing. And what it taught him is an analytical way to remove emotion and everything but the facts surrounding both sides of an argument. And I think that whenever you're doing any type of investment, whether it's Bitcoin, a stock, or a commodity, a bond, whatever it is, you have to try to exercise this process. Now, when you're online, it can get very difficult to do this effectively. I think it's really important for people to focus on, especially on Twitter in particular, when people step away from focusing on the ideas and they start focusing on the person or the personality of the person, for me, that's somebody I don't want to follow. That's somebody I don't really want to interact with, because they're letting a emotion and feeling enter into something that needs to be much more objective and a focus on the actual ideas. So try to find people that are like that they're not slandering you or other people. When I see that, I try to remove those people from my feed, and I try to only focus on people that are hyper-focused on the ideas. The other thing that I'd tell you is ask yourself why 5 times. So when somebody says, whatever the argument is, I think Bitcoin is going to be successful because of X, Y, and Z. Say, well, why do you think this particular thing? And then you'll see different responses from people. And then you can go another layer deeper. I would challenge you to go 5 layers deep on whatever the issue is. And you might even have to go deeper than that to really start to fully understand something. And Stig's point about somebody's own interest. So like Stig, I own some Bitcoin. And so that in itself will bias or warp the way that you see things because you have a vested interest in it going up or it succeeding. So you always have to tell yourself or challenge yourself and saying, am I leaning in this direction simply because I have a position? And a lot of the time you're going to find that you are. And so you have to try to seek out the people that have counter opinions, but just don't seek them out because they have a counter opinion. Seek them out because they have a deep appreciation or understanding for a counter opinion. And I think the way that you can understand whether they have a deep appreciation or understanding of the counter opinion is by going 5 layers deep, asking yourself why 5 times, why they have this position, and really challenge it. But it's a lot of hard work. At the end of the day, what you're talking about, to have an unbiased or a balanced position or understanding of a topic, it's a lot of hard work. In Bitcoin particular, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I am constantly on Twitter arguing with one side of the issue or the other side of the issue, simply because I'm trying to uncover the truth. And I've been doing that for 5 years at this point. So the only way you're going to really understand something is by hearing every side of an argument and exposing yourself to that vulnerability and to really dig in. And it's not easy stuff. It's a lot of hard work.
That's it. Preston and I will continue explaining investing, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button.